And thanks for staying with us on the marketplace. Increment in food prices, housing, electricity and fuel pushed inflation rate for the month of October to 40.4%, up from 37.2% recorded in September this year. Addressing the media, Government Statistician Professor Samuel Kobnenim explained that all items in the component for calculating the rate of inflation recorded an increase.
Consumer Price Index for the month of October 2022 stood at 144.4% relative to 102.9% that was recorded for the same period, October 2021. Given these two indices, year-on-year inflation for the month of October 2022 stood at 40.4%, so indicating a 3.2 percentage point difference between the year-on-year inflation that was recorded for the month of September 2022, which stood at 37.2%. From a food and non-food perspective, we see a sharp increase in food inflation of about 5.9% year-on-year inflation between September 2022 and October 2022, with a rate of October 2022 43.7% relative to 37.8% that was recorded for September 2022. From a non-food perspective, we see a 1 percentage point variation, as we did record 37.8% for October 2022 relative to 36.8% for September 2022. Disaggregating from a domestic and imported inflation perspective, we continue to see a wider variation between imported inflation and domestic inflation, with a difference of about 4.6%, specifically with imported inflation 43.7%, domestic inflation 39.1%.
Joining us on Zoom is Courage Boti, research lead, also an economist with GCB Capital. Thanks for your time, Courage. Yet another milestone, 40.4%. Your reaction?
Not a surprise at all. If you look at the window, you've seen the full impact of the utility tariff hike that took effect from September, kicking in full. You've seen between September, October, city depreciation was very rife. You see the fact that depreciation will feed through to general prices really on the market. You've seen adjustments in transport fares, and of course, petroleum prices at the pumps. All of these playing a big role, for the period. I think the only surprise is that for the September-October window, normally that is the harvest season, and we expect the impact of a new harvest to actually weigh down food inflation. But it turned out that food inflation is rather driving the overall print for this period. Perhaps that is the only surprise. Otherwise, it is to be expected that inflation will continue higher.
And well, usually I like to look at the margins, comparing month on month, see how we are trending. And this looks like a big leap from the previous month. And so just gives an indication whether or not we are doing well in fighting inflation. From the trends that you have seen, there was a point we were talking about whether or not inflation had peaked or not. Now we don't even know where we are going, Courage.
Oh, yes. So a number of, all of what the analysis in the past as to whether it peaked or not, it's of course, all other factors were held constant. But between that time and now, when you saw in the June, July area, when you saw inflation looking like it's about peaking and the month-on-month trend shows some sustained decline, you would assume that if that trend continues, then we should see inflation peak and start decelerating around this fourth quarter period. But what we did not envisage around that time is that we would have more than 27% depreciation in the cedi in a single month, and then continuing. What we did not expect was that there would be some 60% hike in petroleum prices at the pump in just one pricing window. What you did not also anticipate is that food harvest will turn out not to impact food prices in general after all. And so there are a lot of exogenous factors. And for this particular period, you are seeing increased rate of deficit monetization from the central bank, which is in itself inflationary. Last Monday, a 2-year bond matured, 2.3 billion face value. There was no rollover, so those maturities would have been refinanced or would have been paid off using central bank financing. That liquidity injected into the system would actually prove inflationary, really. And I guess it's the reason the Bank of Ghana sustained the policy rate hike to mop up some of those excess liquidity. So if you have the instance where you could not have predicted but the Bank of Ghana is financing the deficit. You have instance where petroleum prices are surging at the pump. You have the instance where CD has depreciated by almost 60% year to date. Obviously, inflation will go out of hand, and that is what we are seeing. You see the month-on-month trend from last month, it was about 2.7. For the month of October, it's 2.0. For the month of October, it's coming 2.7 really. And so it tells you that the underlying pressures to inflation are still there, and so the upward track will continue for a while.
Well, we are told we are going to see inflation slow down when we have an IMF program. And so I just want to run this by you. Fitch Solutions is forecasting a disinflation process for Ghana throughout next year. It says it's due to the expected program of the International Monetary Fund and the stabilization of the cedi. It's looking at an average of 18%. Looking at where we are now, and well, initially we even thought we were going to get an IMF program by the end of the year. Now we are not too sure whether we're going to get it in the first quarter. How feasible is this forecast from Fitch?
Well, a big driver of the inflation has been depreciation, really, because we depend a lot on imported items. The Bank of Ghana's data and the Ghana Statistical Service data on the disaggregated inflation, I think, place inflation on imported items, I think at 43%, 43.97%, as opposed to 39.1% on domestically produced items. And of course, we know that the depreciation in itself is even feeding into domestic items, really, because the transport arrangement and every other thing related, utilities and all of that feed into general price on the market. And so, yes, to extent that a balance of payment program from the IMF would have actually halted the cedi's decline, and it would have had a control on depreciation, that alone is a source of price pressure that is actually curtailed. And then once that stability re-emerges, what you have is you would have a favorable base pool going forward. The rate at which inflation rose quite faster would actually impact its decline when things stabilize ultimately. And so it is not out of place that we could see inflation fall even faster when there is a disinflation process in place. And so 18% may not be far-fetched, but they are looking at average. And so it means that it could even fall lower than that before the average might be appearing around 18%. I haven't personally worked the numbers. I'm waiting for the updated numbers following the adjustment of the base year last month to see the historical figures to do any projection into the future. But I sit here to say that probably if inflation starts a disinflation process, we might see a faster decline.
We hope so. I hesitate to ask you this, but I'll ask anyway. What can we do between now and the end of the year to slow this down?
We must all just cautiously manage our expenditures and be tactical about them. I look at the presentation from the Statistical Service there, top 20 items driving inflation. No doubt petroleum, diesel were big movers, 155% inflation on diesel and 111% on petrol. But then you see items surprisingly like granates in number 3 with inflation rates of about 101%. You see things like palm oil, washing soap, things like millet, coconut oil, underwear, and stuff like that driving inflation, bread, wheat flour. And then you are beginning to ask yourself, what is happening to us as a nation, really? And it goes back to the pricing behavior of people on the markets, because some of the things we very much produce locally that have little dependence on imported items or, depreciation, really, you can't explain why they are recording inflation rates as high as 100% year on year. And so we need to start with our pricing behavior as people who sell on the market. And as individuals, we need to explore our options. If food is the driver, and then you have everybody comes from a village, sort of, can you explore cheaper sources of food from your rural areas? The plantain, the yam, the other stuff, the corn and the other stuff would have consumed around this Yuletide season, the fish and all of that. Can you explore cheaper sources from sources very close to where they are harvested or where these things are produced? And then if you leverage those stuff and then prioritize expenditure, maybe we might be able to cope better. And so, yes, we need to look at our budgets. We need to look at our sources of items we buy and see how we can diversify that to beat down costs, really, while the market women also try to do their bit to moderate the increment in prices.
Well, one thing for sure, it's going to be an expensive Christmas. Thanks so much, Courage Boti, lead researcher with GCB Capital, and economist. I appreciate your insights. Well, economist Professor Godfrey Bokman has joined calls for government to streamline activities in the extractive sector to block revenue leakages in the industry. He says Ghana's revenue from the extractive sector as a percentage of GDP is one of the lowest amongst its peers on the continent. Speaking at the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank breakfast meeting, Professor Bokman said Ghana could earn more than it is seeking from the International Monetary Fund for a bailout from the extractive sector.
More than 80% of our export earnings still driven by primary commodities. Then you can look at how we have structured our revenue generation activities. It's a big issue. Okay, our revenue performance is not the best relative to the size of our GDP. Of course, it's not every aspect of GDP that is taxable and its redistribution. But if you relate how much you generate to GDP, it gives you a fair idea. I'll give you just a few examples. We have just about 2.4 million people who are paying direct income taxes out of an estimation of 13.7 million labor force. Of course, some are unemployed, So, and then when it comes to the extractive sector, if you look at the fiscal regime, and I believe that we need to start that conversation now, and take another look at the kind of structure that we have put in place, because Ghana is not getting its fair share from the extractive sector in terms of the value added. Ghana's revenue from the extractive sector as a percentage of the extractive sector value added is just around 19%. The average for middle-income countries is around 54%. In fact, Nigeria and Botswana, we are told, are doing around 50%. If we were to collect enough revenue from the extractive sector, just as Nigeria is doing, studies have shown that Ghana will be able to collect, in addition, about $4.32 billion.
Well, here's some more perspective from tax analyst Eric Amponsa-Boateng and CEO of Benergy Ghana Limited, Benjamin Mensah, on what government should be doing to wean itself off IMF dependence.
We are not doing the right things because, in my opinion, if we've gone to the IMF for 17 times, the question is that, what have we learned? What were we doing right? What were we doing wrong that made us get there? And so if you've gone to the IMF for 17 times, I think that you should be able to ask yourself why you always have to go back. And I believe that is why we are here. There's something that we are not doing right as a nation. And personally, I think that even after this one, the 18th one, we are likely to go back. We are likely to go back unless we change the way we think, our attitude to work, how we spend our money, revenue that we can mobilize, to the extent that the revenue that we can mobilize internally, we can even triple the amount. Yes, I believe so. So a few months ago, I said this, I think, on one of your platforms, that in my opinion, there was no need for us to go to the IMF. Yes, we've had a pandemic. It's global. In Germany, it is there. I think even in France, 2 weeks ago, there were some protests. But you realize that the decisions that have been taken by the managers of those economies have actually mitigated whatever that they are going through, and it's working for them. I can give an example. In Germany, government is saying that pack your vehicles and go by the public transport, either the rail or the bus. And it's working for them because they have an excellent way regarding their means of transport and all that. And government has even gone further to reduce the tickets that you buy for a month. You know, if you buy 6 months, you pay much less than somebody who probably buys for a month. And we can learn from them. So I ask myself, what are we doing that we are not doing well?
You say we had an alternative not to go to the IMF.
Yes, in my opinion.
But some would disagree with you looking at the crisis we're in, especially with our debt. I'll come to you on that, on what you think should have been the alternative. But I want to come to you, Mr. Mensah. What are we not doing right?
Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and opinions on what we are going through. As an accountant and also a tax expert and an auditor, we don't put our books together well. Government brings a budget. The budget shows excessive spending, and nobody is checking them. Mm-hmm. Every time they read the budget, they will come and cry. There's a revenue that is not coming in. We couldn't meet our targets. So why are you not meeting your target when it comes to revenue mobilization? And if you hit on that point, that look, I need to go back to the drawing board. How am I mobilizing revenue? And revenue mobilization by government is taxation. And our tax system is so porous. You don't know what is what. But thank God for the Ghana card. It is an important card that can, and you have an idea who is in the system, who is working, who is doing what. You understand? So I, for one, said, look, going to the IMF, we have no alternative because we want policy credibility. We want the market to start looking at us again, even though we have gone with 104% over GDP in our borrowing. Mm-hmm. We want the creditors out there to say, look, we are still in to do the right things. So now you have the boogeyman in town, the IMF, who's going to discipline you. But after they leave, what are you going to do with the discipline that you have brought onto yourself?
Critical question. After they leave, what are we going to do? And that's where we always fail.
Yes.
But I want to bring up the point, and just to be fair, I mean, the finance minister had filed that we're not going to go to the IMF for a program. And when he said that, our economy seemed to be doing well at that point, and then the pandemic struck, and then we had the war in Ukraine. I want to come to you, Mr. Mponsa. I mean, the government always says the situation we are in is because of the external factors, some of these unforeseen circumstances. Is that enough excuse to explain why we have to go to the IMF for support?
Well, to an extent, I think that the situation that we find ourselves in is as a result of some external factors, but probably to an extent. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that we can lay the issue solely on those external factors. My reason is simple. Countries around us or everywhere in the world, they've all gone through that. But some of them have even taken advantage of that and have been able to strengthen their economies by creating jobs and all that. You know that when we had the pandemic in Ghana, last week I was listening to a story on one of your networks. There was a lady who has completed university. And when we had the COVID, she started sewing nose masks, the sanitizers. Now she's been able to develop or manufacture her own sanitizer. And she's making money. People started working from home. And that is where I even found out that most top firms are now working or advising their employees to work from home, and therefore giving away those premises that they have rented. So what it means is, yes, you may have the pandemic, but there's always...
So your point being that the pandemic created some opportunities for us to expand our business and promote
the economy,
the economy. And so I agree with you on the point that, and with what others have said, that the problem is the structure of our economy. Right now, we import so much. We've seen what is happening to the city right now.
Yes.
And so where do we begin from Mr. Mensah in restructuring our economy so that we don't have to head back to the IMF? Because it's just for a period. And once they get off, like you pointed out, we come back to the same situation. We have to fix the fundamental problem.
We have been talking about adding value to resources that we get from Ghana. We have been talking about it for over 60 years. 60 years. It is recently that we are building gold refineries in Ghana. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So let's go back to the drawing board. Everybody, the structure, the structure. You have
So some perspective from analysts over there on what we can do to win ourselves of dependence on the IMF. You're watching a marketplace. We want to tend to tech stuff. A lot happening in the tech space. Tech company Twitter has fired nearly all its staff in Ghana more than a week after billionaire Elon Musk took over the company. A source told the BBC that only one person was left in the almost two-member team. Quote, the company is reorganizing its operations as a result of a need to reduce costs, read the email to staff from Fidelma Callaghan, Director People Services. Mr. Musk promised to make big changes at Twitter, including laying off workers worldwide. The employment termination emails were sent to the Ghana employees' personal accounts, having been denied access to their work ones. Joining us at Marketplace Tech Pundit, Henry Kobler, also lead for Eyes of Africa. Appreciate your time with us, Henry. So this is an anticlimax sort of. I remember a year ago, we were celebrating the opening of the Twitter office here in Ghana. Looks like the members, the staff here have been affected by the job cuts. Your reaction?
Thank you very much, Daryl. So I think that it was a bit of celebration, which I called into question a bit of exactly what that office is really going to offer. Because I felt that at the point it looked like it was just one of the favors that was just being done to Africans by these tech giants. And again, I called into question what the offices such as Google would have had such impact in our tech ecosystem as Africans. And so for me, this really does not come to me as a surprise, because generally, I think that we're speaking about the great resignation that's sort of coming through with the tech systems. It had been long coming through, looking at what was happening with Netflix, even with Facebook and all of that. So I think that the major part is that, I mean, when it gets down to tech systems, people within the ecosystem really sort of understand this trend and do not really get surprised about it, because there's a lot of exits, there's a lot of mergers, lots of acquisitions that really happens over the time. And so at the point where you're finding now that there's a new employer that's coming in, you should definitely know that there could be changes. And again, if you're looking at someone as radical as Elon, I mean, you should definitely come in. If somebody's acquiring a company and the very first week he's basically taking out almost half of the jobs of people, I mean, how do you do even critical analysis of some of the roles and to be sure that these roles are really not necessarily possible to get some gains for the company? That should tell you he had done a lot of his homework. He brings in trusted engineers from Tesla to basically sit behind the pieces at Twitter. So he had all and everything planned out. And so for him as a business, he's just looking at how basically he can roll in, make the profit, and also just get it attractive. For the employees, I mean, generally, there are always ways to address some of these grievances. And I'm sure that if they are not happy, they will definitely find a way to get to the courts and demand some justice for that.
Well, the BBC reporting one staff member saying it's very insulting, the entire thing, from the mail to the lack of next steps to the tone of the letter. I'm wondering if the workers here have a case. I know in other countries there are plans to sue Twitter. How do you see this play out for the staff? I mean, this is Africa. And then the next thing is, what does this mean for the future of Twitter in Africa? Does it really impact the operations here on the continent because they've sacked people from their Ghana office?
So I don't think so. I mean, Twitter had already been operating and had some level of success with the numbers from Africans. So the office generally was just doing more of assistance and support. And so it might not necessarily impact. And again, the vision of the buyer, Elon, definitely goes way beyond just Africans. So it's looking at solutions where it's really looking at how it's going to be a competitor to WeChat, which is basically a more successful application in China, and looking at replicating a lot of its models with Twitter. And so I don't think that it would really have a lot of impact. But again, like I said, I wouldn't blame Twitter for such language, especially because if you look at the language which was used for Africans and the language which was used for employees outside Africa, you'd realize that there's some quite differences. There are some severance packages that are being thrown out to the employees that are out there. But with Africans, there's so much silence on anything that they could just be getting in terms of their termination with Twitter. That comes to me as a part where our leaders here and our policymakers definitely are not putting their legs in the right direction. And so we're looking at Twitter today. but there are quite a number of multinational companies that are in our country, Uber and the likes, quite a number of multinational companies that are here. I mean, what's the policy in terms of protecting the labor force that they are picking in? That should be one of the things that we should be discussing and looking at. So it might just be Twitter today because it's just based on a few people fired from there. But what if the mass action class comes to, let's say, Uber or Bolt or any of the competitor applications that are coming in as international applications? And some of those ones are the policies that I'm looking forward to having local discussions to how we're going to protect people. There's been a lot of cry with some of the applications that are being run here, and let's say the users of these applications have raised a number of concerns where you don't have government or any policy maker making comments or talking about it deliberately. And so I think that relatively the tone and language, that is respect and everything that comes in is only because we don't have the rules and we don't have the policies guiding our labor forces when it gets down to the internet sector.
And just a bit of a footnote, employment law in Ghana requires at least 3 months notice of termination. It also demands redundancy pay, which is to be negotiated between the organization, the employer, or trade union. So lots to explore in the coming days. Thank you so much, Henry Kobler, Lead Eyes of Africa, for your perspective this afternoon. And that's the marketplace. More news on our website, myjoyonline.com/business. The day's latest, including the latest inflation figures on that website, myjoyonline.com/business. My name is Daryl. Thanks for watching. We'll be back same time tomorrow.